Good afternoon. This is Greg McSorley at the SNIA Technical Council. Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by SNIA and STAY. What we got for you today is what's next in storage. We got a couple of experts to help us with it. So what we have is myself, obviously, I'm on the Technical Council, but I'm really here just for the SNIA. Rick Cutsbull, who's President of the Trade Association, and Don Jeanette, Vice President with Trend Focus. So just a little background on SNIA. SNIA is a nonprofit global organization dedicated to developing standards and education programs to advance storage and information technology. It was incorporated in 1997. SNIA's mission is to lead the storage industry worldwide in developing and promoting vendor-neutral architecture standards and educational services that facilitate the efficient management, movement, and security of information. A mouthful, but we have, right now you can see on the screen, we have 160 different organizations that are in the group, over 2,500 active contributing members, and 50,000 IT end users in storage worldwide. So from that, I'm just going to turn it over to Rick here so he can take you on to the webinar. Please enjoy the webinar and let us know how you feel at the end. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Like Greg said, my name is Rick Cutsbull. I'm the president of the SCSI Trade Association. Just a quick blurb on the SCSI Trade Association. STAY is a 20-year-old industry alliance made up of storage leaders representing all facets of storage, ranging from cables, connectors, disk drives, test equipment, pretty much the whole ecosystem of storage. The SCSI Trade Association promotes all things SCSI, and remember, SCSI is more than just SAS, right? It's SCSI is the underlying storage protocol in USB, FireWire, Fiber Channel, and others, right? And so right now we're pretty much focusing on SAS, but it does cover many other things. And I urge you to go to scsiTA.org for more information. All right, so today what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a couple storage predictions looking out into the future and talk a little bit about those. And then Don's going to give a market update and tie into those and show what backs some of those predictions. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. I urge you to ask your questions in the box below the slides, and then what we'll do is we will review those at the end. We'll try to answer anything we can in this forum, and then we will be publishing answers to all of the questions in a future blog. And with that, I'll get started. My first prediction focuses on the relevance of HDDs, right? You've all seen the press releases and all the press on other technologies, almost implying that HDDs are out of gas, and that's really not the case. In other areas outside of the enterprise, it is more relevant. But HDDs will continue to innovate and will play an important role in enterprise storage moving forward. And it's driven by a couple things. One is just the cost per bit, right? So in the head-to-head comparisons, HDDs have a very compelling, very low cost per bit. And Don will give some market data on that. And then there's the advancements in areal density, right? They continue to increase, right? So the capacities of these drives continues to grow. We're seeing drives, well in the excess of 10 terabytes in the mainstream. And that kind of innovation with, technologies like SMR and helium, right? Those will continue, and ultimately we're going to see hard disk drives play an important role moving forward. My second prediction is on the adoption of alternative protocols. The majority of NVMe success will be limited to the client, which we're seeing, predominant today, and will continue to replace SATA within the data center. But from an enterprise persistent technology, right, there are a number of things that NVMe still has to overcome. Not that they're not achievable, but that are going to be demanded by the enterprise. things like serviceability, robust surprise add remove, for instance, which these are table stakes that have been set within the industry and are expected by enterprise customers. Then, a superset of all that would be considered, air handling. What happens when there's a cable break or a bad cable, bad connector, right? Those types of things have to be handled very predictably and very deterministically. And those are some of the barriers that are going to have to be overcome to be able to, play robustly in the enterprise. And then finally, my last prediction is that SAS will continue to play or continue to be the protocol of choice for persistent storage within the enterprise. So it kind of dovetails on the last one, and it really hinges on the flexibility and the scalability, right? The flexibility, SAS not only supports SAS HDDs, but SAS SSDs, as well as SATA HDDs and SSDs. So it's this flexibility that provides a significant advantage in the SAS infrastructure. And then the native scalability of SAS, whether it's a direct connect environment within a server to scale out of thousands and thousands of drives. Right, SAS has a distinct advantage and will remain the dominant storage interface servicing these technologies moving forward. And so now what I want to do is, with those in mind, I want to turn it over to Don, and Don's going to give us, a very fresh, very up-to-date market outlook, backing up some of these predictions. Don?
Okay, thank you, Rick. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So again, I'll go through some market dynamics, market updates, and it's going to be both the hard disk drive segment as well as the SSD segment. Okay. So if we look at the hard drive market, right, Trend Focus, has a unique perspective of being able to look at both industries and the corresponding underlying technologies and components that support those industries, both hard drives and SSDs. And a question everyone gets, or a comment that everyone hears often is, aren't hard drives dead? Aren't SSDs taking over hard drives? And of course, the simple answer is no. Although you can see here from the updated long-term forecast we have on this slide, the overall trend is declining, right? But again, within all those separate markets, there are some very distinct markets where they have become a very big priority for the three remaining hard disk drive makers. One of them obviously being the nearline or high capacity SAS and SATA hard disk drive markets. I will go into that market specifically in the following slides. But another market within this trend is obviously the surveillance market. That is thriving as well. You want to think of all the news we hear about out in the world, the initiatives, the products being introduced. When it comes to personal security, both online, home, office, think about the encryption that we're hearing everywhere in the news, security, and then all the surveillance cameras that correspond with all of that, and the vast amounts of storage that need to be accompanied for those surveillance cameras and what have you. So in essence, the hard disk drive market today is well over a $20 billion industry, right? All the component and support structure under the hard drive manufacturers going along with that. Obviously, a market not to be ignored today, nor many years in the future. Okay. So if we look at the enterprise market, both the chart I have here is performance hard disk drives, right? That's 10,000 RPM and 15,000 RPM, and enterprise SSDs combined. The performance segment is in the orange section there. It has dominated. This is a historical snapshot of exabytes shipped, right? So performance enterprise in the orange has dominated over the past many years when it comes to exabytes shipped compared to solid state drives. those are all SAS hard disk drives, right? And even though the SSDs have caught up of late when it comes to exabytes shipped versus Performance Enterprise, Performance Enterprise are still almost 50% of all the exabytes shipped of the recent quarters that we just exited. And if you add in the SATA and SAS SSDs, SATA SSDs being the blue portion, SAS SSDs being the red portion, you're at about 80% of all exabytes shipped in the market that are under the SAS infrastructure. Remember, this doesn't even include nearline, right? We still have to talk about nearline. And if we talk about, markets served, Performance Enterprise has been traditionally the system OEMs going to the traditional enterprise market. Think of the military and governments and what have you. So, it's a known protocol, serviceability, error handling. It's a known entity to many suppliers and customers. So it's the mentality of, it's not broke, don't fix it. We have seen some movement for end customers in the market going for, building their own internal data centers, obviously moving over to the cloud. And so that has affected some of the Performance Enterprise business in the market. Also, we have seen some erosion from Performance Enterprise moving over to SSDs. Simply put, price elasticity. So as the pricing of SSDs have declined, the last 2 years being an anomaly where they really didn't decline that much because of the NAND shortage, but they have declined historically, and with each decline, some end customers are more willing to switch over to the newer technologies, but again, still going many times with that SAS infrastructure-related technologies. Okay. So now let's talk about nearline. Put simply, nearline hard disk drives are now the holy grail for every hard disk drive storage vendor, right? This, again, like the last slide, is a historical snapshot of exabytes shipped. The purple portion are nearline hard disk drives. The blue is your Performance Enterprise. So that blue sliver corresponds to the orange portion that you saw on the previous slide. So I wanted to put a comparison for Performance Enterprise versus nearline. Some seasonality aside, you can see how it has exploded over the past few years from an exabyte perspective. Think of all our kids. I have kids. For those of us that have children out there, think of all the pictures and videos that they continue to load to their online accounts. Multiple data center deployments from multiple major hyperscale companies continuing to happen. More racks and data centers for redundancy and reliability. So obviously explosive growth of late for the exabytes for nearline. And then, at a snapshot to help justify this growth, if we talk about capacities, today we're at about an average capacity of 7 terabytes or greater for nearline, both SAS and SATA hard disk drives. We do have 14 terabyte hard disk drives and qualifications this year for nearline. If we look at the quarter that just ended, first calendar quarter, 2018, for units and exabytes, we broke all the records once again. Both units and exabytes for nearline have outshipped all previous quarters where we saw the results come in. And again, all under the SAS infrastructure. And from a unit perspective split for nearline, obviously they do go to both hyperscale and system OEMs. It's been about a 50-50 split from a unit perspective. But from an exabyte perspective, obviously hyperscale does dictate 2/3 to even greater than maybe 70% of the bits shipped for nearline hard disk drives. The remaining going to system OEMs to end markets. Okay. So now let's dig a little deeper. So this is the enterprise hard disk drive forecast by units, and I've mapped the average capacities to the right hand axis there. So this is looking at the future. Where are things going? Obviously, another illustration of why nearline is a priority for hard disk drive vendors. Growth in all three major markets, system OEMs for traditional enterprise, hyperscale, and then also the channel in the aftermarket. If we're going forward, I just mentioned the average capacities. We're going to be looking at close to 16 terabytes in 2022, right? And that illustrates the continued R&D from all hard drive vendors or the required technologies and the corresponding protocols supported there. So if you add in, that red portion at the bottom, which is 10,000 and 15,000 RPM, it's 100% SAS or SATA. 100% of this market is still under the SAS infrastructure umbrella, even five plus years out, which is where our forecast currently goes to. Within that nearline market, that green portion there, I'd say close to 20%, or we know that close to 20% are SAS, nearline hard disk drives. The remaining 80% is SATA nearline hard disk drives. So again, both good growth for both protocols going forward. So for the 10 and 15,000 RPM, that red portion at the bottom, we're shipping 2.4 terabyte today, right? So still high capacities, higher capacities, not as high as nearline, but there. So support for these, along with the decent unit shipments for legacy applications going forward, support for that is going to need to be continued, right? So they're not going away. They're going to have a long tail. There's some healthy debates out there on how fast that erosion is for 10 and 15,000 RPM. But again, we're talking about the enterprise market. Things are slow to move, right? For anyone that's done this for a while, like many of us have. I mean, think about fiber channel and parallel SCSI, 68 and 80 pin storage devices. Think of how long we ship those. SCSI is a known entity. It's proven. It's market tested. And like I like to say, is it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So again, not going anywhere anytime soon. So if we look at the hard drive market by exabytes, right? Previous slide was units. We wanted to talk about exabytes here. A few slides back, I showed you the historical exabyte shipments. And now you can see future exabyte growth for hard disk drives, and it's pretty staggering, right? We're at about a 35% CAGR moving forward for exabyte shipments growth. And again, contributing to this growth is both SAS and SATA. It is, like I said, with system OEMs, it's with hyperscale, it's with channel business, and it's not going anywhere. So if we talk about pricing for a minute and buying behaviors, right, and we throw in some SSD commentary here, nearline hard disk drives are less than 3 cents a gigabyte today on average, right? If we look at the lowest end enterprise SATA SSD today, we're somewhere around 25 cents a gigabyte. SAS is higher than that. PCIe, depending on what market you talk about, you could be anywhere from the high 20s to the low 40s per gigabyte. So again, from a pricing perspective, nothing can really touch these nearline hard disk drives in the foreseeable future at all. And again, back to the research and development, the money spent to support this exabyte growth to get to those 16 terabyte, those 20 terabyte hard disk drives is going to continue from those multiple hard drive vendors. So let's switch over a bit for SSDs. So this is our overall SSD forecast. This is all in, every type, every application, client and enterprise. So I wanted to show you the overall forecast, including client. And what jumps out at you is that client pretty much dominates the unit forecast, right? Think of all the notebook and desktop systems in the world. That purple portion are your modules. Those are your M.2 type devices. As Rick mentioned earlier, PCIe has made inroads in the client market. It continues to make inroads, and at the expense of SATA. For that protocol, obviously Apple has dominated in the past, both from the form factor and protocol for NVMe. But you know, today many other system OEMs have now implemented with NVMe. To just give you some color there, you know, in Q4 exiting last year, we did 22 million client modules worldwide. Of those 22 million, 11 million were M.2 SATA, and just under 11 million, or 10.6 million, were M.2 with NVMe. So we expect that to significantly outship the SATA solutions by the end of 2018. But again, that's in the client segment. That little sliver at the bottom there, the red portion, I'm sorry, the blue portion, the red portion, and then the green portion, those are units for enterprise SSDs. Again, worldwide, all vendors, right? Small from a unit perspective, but again, a priority for SSD vendors. So again, with the client dominating from a unit perspective, I relate it to many years in the hard drive industry. What we always said was the client hard drives would pay the bills and keep the lights on, and all your profitability would come from the enterprise segment. And in the SSD market, it has become the same situation. Your client SSDs are keeping the lights on and paying a lot of the bills. Your enterprise SSDs are getting you your profit for the company. Okay. So let's look at enterprise specifically. These are exabytes forecasted for enterprise SSDs. The blue portion are your SATA SSDs. The red portion are your SAS SSDs. The green portion is your NVMe segment. So going out, you know, unlike the unit discrepancy on the previous slide, enterprise SSD exabytes actually equal client exabytes a few years out, if not surpass in 2022 and beyond. So again, all the NAND shipments worldwide going to SSDs, which is about 40% of all NAND bits being shipped from every fab in the world, 40% of the NAND goes to SSDs. Half are going to enterprise, half are going to client, versus unit base, it's 85+% client units versus enterprise units. So again, that's why the priority is there from the SSD vendors. If we talk about markets served, the top portion, NVMe in green, obviously that's been hyperscale, right? Hyperscale has made some transitions over to NVMe at the expense of SATA. If we talk to the SAS portion in red, those are your storage networking companies, you know, implementing with SAS SSDs, shipping to the traditional enterprise market. And then your SATA, we are seeing obviously healthy business in both the system OEM, still the hyperscale market, and the channel and aftermarket as well. So if we talk about exabytes versus pricing in this market, I touched on it earlier, but why does SATA and SAS remain dominant in the future, even with the introduction of NVMe? So if we think about system OEMs and how they sell their products to the end market, right? They're buying storage devices from various SSD vendors, and regardless of what those price points are coming from the SSD vendors, whether a SATA SSD and an NVMe SSD are the same price, they're still going to bend metal around those different protocol-based devices and price them differently to the end market. So as an example, if a system OEM vendor is buying a boatload of U.2 NVMe devices, bending metal around it, shipping a server to the end market, that price point for that box is obviously and most likely going to be higher than, say, a SATA-based system, right? So the market pull is going to be lower for that NVMe-based system versus a lower-priced tiered SATA-based system, and SAS usually falls in between those two from a pricing perspective. That's a system OEM statement. So again, those protocols are known, they're not broken, they're getting compelling price points from various vendors, so it's going to be around for a long time. If we talk about design cycles, right, call it 18 months plus or minus for a new system design cycle, and the corresponding qualifications for those said SSD devices going into those systems, and even hard drive devices, that takes a while, right? So you are not going to EOL every SKU with a previous technology with a brand new protocol in the market all at once. It's going to take years. So if we look at this market out to 2022, that's 4 design cycles out, plus or minus, call it 3 maybe. SAS and SATA are going to stay a compelling solution, a technology, for all the reasons that Rick touched on and that I touched on in some of my slides moving forward. The other metric here that will keep SATA and SAS around for some time, think about the SSD companies and their strategies and the underlying controller technologies and strategies from controller companies. There's about 12 SSD vendors worldwide that dictate most of the volumes, much less than that for 3/4 of the volume. But we could rattle about 12 SSD companies off right now. Not all of those companies have an NVMe solution ready to go, right? So a lot of those companies that do ship SATA and SAS SSDs will continue to ship that because that's what they know. That's a proven technology. Resources or expertise not ready to move to a new protocol. All those things coupled together are another reason why you see these known entities staying around for quite some time. So again, I said earlier, 2/3 of all these exabytes you see on this chart moving forward are still falling under the SAS infrastructure. And I also wanted to touch on again the bits shipped for SSDs versus hard drives. Hard drive exabytes, you might have remembered on a previous slide in 2022, enterprise should reach about 1,200 exabytes, right? SSDs are going to be close to 90 exabytes. So again, the huge discrepancy. There isn't enough NAND bits to go around in the world, obviously, to replace what we're currently shipping for hard drives. Pricing as well. So that's going to keep hard drives around for quite some time. I mean, we could take more SSD exabytes and put them into SSDs and take away from our cell phones and tablets and what have you. But I don't think companies are going to be too happy if we take away NAND supply from the cell phones. So they have to divvy up and figure out in the war rooms where all these NAND bits are going, and they have other applications that are priorities as well. Okay, now I get to do my shameless plug for Trend Focus. So Trend Focus has been around for more than a quarter century. We started with hard disk drive components, moved into hard drives, and then we've been doing SSDs and NAND for about 9 years now. We have a diverse staff from all backgrounds and disciplines, technical, business, marketing, system level experience, component level experience. We are located in Cupertino, California. And just to give you an idea of our range of clients, every type of client from Wall Street to component suppliers to controller vendors to SSD and hard drive vendors, system OEMs, hyperscale. So we run the gamut across the spectrum for all types of clients. Okay. Thank you very much. I guess we'll open it up.
Thanks, Don. I just wanted to wrap up with a comment, and then we would dig into some questions. So Don gave a really good, fresh look at what's happening today, and then also forward-looking, and so I appreciate that, Don. We can't ignore the emerging technologies. I mean, they're present. They're going to be very important to all of us moving forward, but we need to remember what got us to where we are and the reasons why. We got to keep all that in context. Bottom line is that SAS will remain a dominant storage interface within the enterprise, and I think Don did a good job, kind of showing that kind of by the numbers. And I am looking at the questions that have been entered, and let's see if we can't address some of these. So I will read them off, and then whichever one of the experts want to answer it, then feel free. So the first one is regarding, I believe it was my comment about NVMe and serviceability. It's really about, right, if you think of serviceability in the data center today, right? The IT professionals rely on surprise add and removal of drives, right? Especially in rated arrays, et cetera. You got to be able to yank the drive and not lose any data, not corrupt any data, and that still has to be addressed within NVMe. Again, is it overcomable? Absolutely, but it's still very, very early in its cycle. The second one is this one I can answer. Are you planning a 24 gig SAS plug fest anytime soon? So yes, this is a very hot topic. So remember, the SCSI Trade Association is the governing body of the SAS plug fests. We do them at University of New Hampshire's IOL, and right now we are trying to pin down the appropriate time for the first plug fest. It's a balance between getting out there early as well as then ecosystem availability of the equipment to test. So I'd say stay tuned on that. But yes, that is on the list to be determined, and we will be publishing a date pretty soon. Next question. It says the cost per gigabyte just quoted, and I believe this was on the SSD forecast slide, Don, number 15.
Yeah.
Is that acquisition only or TCO? If TCO, what period of time?
That is acquisition costs. So finished device shipping to a customer, user capacity, those were your cost per gigs, average market averages.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Next question. Don, this is an interesting one. Don, the stock market is punishing WDC and to a lesser extent Seagate. This has been attributed to the called death of HDDs. Seems to be a definite overreaction. It seems you agree. Any additional comments?
I completely agree. And I will say this, especially for WDC, I think, every storage vendor that has NAND supply for the last 8+ quarters has seen fantastic profitability because of the NAND environment and the shortage. I think exiting Q4 and then now through Q1 that just ended and Q2, pricing has seen some healthy declines. So it's basically the storage industry that we know and love for decades up until about 2 years ago, where they had to really manage their costs and try to maintain profit margins. But again, with the NAND shortage over the past 2 years, it's been great business. Now it's back to the drawing board to try to maintain profit in business with supply coming back online. The next one I could just jump to, Rick. What is the breakdown for form factors for NVMe and hyperscalers? I'm not going to break that out specifically, but what I will say, just recently, one of the quarters that just ended, if we did about 1.4 million units for enterprise PCIe, about 900,000 were M.2, about 400,000 were U.2, and the remaining were traditional add-in cards. Okay. And that's going to fluctuate over time. I will give additional commentary on that. With various different hyperscale companies transitioning over to NVMe, I think you will see different hyperscale companies choosing different form factors, whether it be M.2 or module, I should say, or U.2, the traditional SFF 8639 that we used to call it. So you'll see those volumes ebb and flow each quarter, depending on which hyperscale company is deploying a new build out and which form factor they're choosing. But I think overall in the future, either form factor, module or U.2, if they're both a good bet, you're going to see lots and lots of volumes for each in the out years.
Okay. So, Don, the next question is, how do your observations play in the context of cloud storage provider adoption?
How do you adapt? So how do they play in? So, I mean, you know, when we talk to many of our clients worldwide, and we see, you know, how we see, you know, certain companies either continuing to see compelling technologies from system OEMs at price takedowns. They will continue to, you know, build their own storage and data centers, but, you know, moving over to cloud storage providers, you know, that's their choice based on what workloads they're using, what type of security they need, or, you know, and then the cloud service providers themselves, obviously, they're procuring hardware and building out their data centers. They're not bending metal to the end customer and selling to end customers. They're selling us faster load pages, like I say, you know, for us to buy shoes for our kids online and faster load pages, right? They're not selling boxes to the end market. So they have many avenues they can go in, and if they find storage vendors that give them, you know, very compelling prices for various technologies, they could go internal and do whatever they want with them and not have to worry about an end customer from a hardware perspective.
Okay. Next question. In the future, will SSDs be available in protocols other than SAS, SATA, or PCIe, i.e. CCIX, Gen Z, etc.? Don, you want to take that? You want me to take it?
I'll start it, maybe add some commentary.
Okay.
So again, from a market adoption and how we see protocols, EOL, you know, I like to use an example of like parallel ATA to serial ATA back in '99 to say 2001 or 2002. That was a huge industry effort all at once to go to serial ATA. We were maxing out at 100 meg throughput at the connector. We needed SATA. The whole industry agreed, and we did it. So the other thing I will say is those three protocols there, for the applications and markets they serve and who is buying them, they're good enough, or in some cases they're an upsell that are going to dictate higher pricing. So when they're good enough, they're going to continue for a long time. I think to displace those, especially SAS and SATA in the near term, is going to be difficult with something new. I think, you know, especially from a price point and elasticity perspective, that's going to be a challenge. So the other thing to say here is, you know, as long as Intel supports it from a chipset or driver perspective, again, and, you know, it's free on the motherboard, right? Free is always better. Certain protocols are going to stay around for a long time until the support infrastructure decides to do away with it as well, even though they might have support for a different protocol in the same offerings. Okay?
Yeah, no, I agree. And, you know, a little more tactically, you know, right now, the industry is not seeing, you know, a push toward these technologies. I think especially with the, you know, the treadmill of PCIe going to Gen 5 so rapidly. I think, you know, I don't think there's an advantage of going to a mid-step, if you will, and a new protocol. So right now I'm not thinking we're going to see alternative protocols for storage. Okay.
I'll take the next one, Rick.
Okay.
Client SSD attach rates in the PC market and NAND and hard drive, you know, implications. So we exited 2017 at the high 30-something%, called 38% attach rate across notebook systems, call it 17-18% for desktop systems. That would have been about 44% if we weren't in the NAND shortage situation. So it did relax or pull back on the attach rates where system OEMs were taking in SSDs. The other important piece here, it also pulled back on the mix of products. So in 2017, we actually saw the average capacity go down for notebook and PC computers for SSDs, as opposed to historically going up a little bit every quarter. And that was a function of, SSD pricing on a dollar per gig metric go up greater than 30% in 6 quarters. That's going to have a lot of people pause on what they're actually going to buy. So going forward, if we go out to 2022, we see that growing to 80% plus or minus, so call it 75 to low 80s from a percentage perspective on the attach rates. And my closing comment on that is you have to remember the commercial and the consumer markets have 2 very different buying behaviors. The commercial market is, the capacity is not as big a concern as the consumer market. So a 128 or even a 256, or I should say a 256, or in some cases even a 128 may be good enough because you're not having all your personal data stored on your notebook PC at work, or you're not supposed to anyway. Whereas in the consumer market, historically, it really hasn't changed that much. You have 2 major metrics that you are going to buy your system for. It is capacity and price point, and if the vast majority of the world has had a 500 gigabyte or greater hard disk drive in their system, and the average system is less than $400 price point, they have to go in and say, to the best of their ability, I'd like to at least equal my capacity or go greater, and I'm not willing to spend that much more. So that has held back attach rates in the consumer market for SSDs. Okay. Our SAS drive forecast based on 12 gig or 24 gig interfaces. It is SAS gen agnostic at the connector. We can make some assumptions on some, Rick, you can talk to the introduction on 24 gig and where you see it, but again, we don't split out 12 and 24 gig on the SAS SSD unit forecast today. Okay.
Okay. And that's it. That's it. We will write some of this up and post it. Thank you for your feedback as well. I think this is a great forum. Thank you to SNIA for hosting us on this platform, and for Don Jeanette offering his services. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.